They always tell you in the comments, just get a 12 gauge, scare 'em off, like we're living in some old Western movie where consequences don't exist, but I didn't need a shotgun to defend my land. I had something far more dangerous. Infinite patience, a mountain of paperwork, and 3 rows of industrial-grade tire deflation devices buried beneath the soft earth of my driveway. My name is Arthur Art Miller. I'm 45, and for decades, these 80 acres of Ohio soil were the only heaven I ever needed. A place where the only noise was the wind whispering through the cornstalks and the lowing of my cattle. A sanctuary built on quiet mornings and honest sweat. It was a life devoid of homeowners associations, free from committee meetings about the shade of your mailbox, just me and the land, until the day the silence was shattered by the high-pitched whine of a luxury engine. It started on a Saturday in May, the kind of morning that feels like a painting, dew clinging to the grass, the sun just waking up the world, when I saw it. A white, pristine SUV cresting the hill like a spaceship landing on Mars, cutting a jagged scar straight through my cornfield, throwing mud in perfect, arrogant arcs. I stood there on my porch, coffee mug suspended halfway to my mouth, too stunned to even curse as the driver, a woman behind oversized sunglasses, offered a casual wave through the windshield like she was the grand marshal of a parade I never agreed to host. And just like that, she disappeared toward the gated community of Oakwood Heights, leaving tire tracks on my soul. That was my introduction to Brenda Sterling, the vice president of the Oakwood HOA and the self-appointed queen of shortcuts. 2 days later, she did it again, same speed, same entitlement, same complete disregard for the concept of private property. But this time I managed to flag her down, stepping into the path of her vehicle until she rolled the window down just enough to let out the air conditioning and a waft of expensive perfume. "Ma'am," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "This is private property. You're driving through my fields. You can't be here." But she just smirked, the kind of expression you give a child who doesn't understand how the real world works, and said, "Relax. There's a community easement. It's been here since the 70s, everyone knows that." And before I could tell her that my deed said otherwise, she rolled up the window and drove around me like I was a traffic cone. I went straight to my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, a woman who treats contracts like holy scripture, and we pulled the records, looking for anything that would give this woman the right to turn my farm into her personal highway. But the title was clean, pristine, absolutely no shared access, which meant every time Brenda's tires touched my dirt, she was breaking the law. You'd think knowing the truth would stop her, but people like Brenda don't operate on truth, they operate on convenience. I put up signs, simple ones at first, private property, no trespassing, but she treated them like decorations, speeding past them without a glance, shaving 8 minutes off her commute, while tearing up the inheritance I planned to leave to my children. My neighbor, Old Man Russo, watched her fly by one afternoon and spat on the ground, shaking his head as he leaned against the fence, telling me, "That woman thinks the world is just one big cul-de-sac, and we're all just landscaping." And he wasn't wrong, because when I sent a certified cease and desist letter, the kind that costs money and time, she signed for it, drove to my property line the next morning, and tossed the crumpled ball of paper out of her window onto my land, a piece of litter that screamed, "I am untouchable." I realized then that being polite was a luxury I could no longer afford, not because I wanted violence, but because being ignored is a slow poison that eventually kills your spirit. 6 months went by, 6 months of documenting dates, times, and the deepening ruts in my road. 6 months of watching her arrogant white SUV become a clockwork demon in my peaceful life. I tried talking to her one last time, catching her while she was stopped on the edge of the property taking a call, and I approached her calm as a preacher, pleading with her, telling her she was destroying my crops, stressing my animals. But she just sighed, stretching my name out like Arthur was a chore she didn't want to do, saying, "Oh, Art, my husband Charles checked the plats. It's part of our community plan. You're just not used to how we do things in Oakwood." And she drove off, her tires spitting gravel against my shins, leaving me in a cloud of dust and rage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the big manila folder, the war chest, as I'd started calling it, laying out the deed, the survey maps, the tax records, and I called Sarah, asking her what a man does when the law is a ghost and the trespasser is a tank. She told me to document, to be patient, to build a case so heavy it would crush her when it finally fell. So that's what I did. I installed trail cameras, solar-powered sentinels that watched the bend where she entered, logging her movements at 7:13 a.m. every single day, like clockwork. I sent more letters. I called the sheriff's office, asking for help, and that's when I met Deputy Morgan, a young officer with eyes that had seen enough nonsense to know when a man was telling the truth. She came out, walked the property, looked at the ruts, the bent corn, and sighed the heavy sigh of someone whose hands are tied by bureaucracy, telling me, "Mr. Miller, you're doing everything right, but unless I catch her in the act or she refuses to leave, this is a civil matter. I can warn her, but I can't arrest her on a hunch." Deputy Morgan did warn her, drove right up to the manicured gates of Oakwood Heights and told Brenda to cut it out. But Brenda just laughed it off, claiming harassment, claiming fake paperwork, claiming that she was the victim of a crazy farmer who didn't understand progress. The harassment didn't stop. It evolved into psychological warfare. She started honking as she passed my barn, a double tap of the horn just to let me know she was there, just to see if I would come out and shake my fist like a cartoon character. But the breaking point wasn't the noise, and it wasn't the ruts in the dirt, it was Bessie. Bessie was one of my pregnant heifers, nervous by nature, and one morning as Brenda roared through at 40 miles an hour, honking that infernal horn, Bessie panicked, throwing herself against the barbed wire fence, tearing her flank, trembling in the mud, sweat streaking her coat in terror. I found her there, bleeding and shaking, and as I calmed her down, listening to the fading sound of that white SUV, something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but the quiet, terrifying sound of a lock clicking into place. I looked out at the road, the dust settling over the scene of the crime, and I made a promise to Bessie, to myself, and to the God of this land that I wasn't going to shoot Brenda Sterling. I wasn't going to scream at her. I was going to destroy her world with the very rules she thought she was above. The time for talking was over. It was time for the incident's folder to become a weapon, and for the road she loved so much to become the trap she never saw coming. I stopped looking for a solution and started planning an execution, legal execution, of course. I sat down with Sarah, my lawyer, and we went over the options: civil suit, injunction, boundary survey, all slow, all expensive, all easy for a woman with Oakwood Heights money to ignore. Then Sarah, knowing I was at the end of my rope, leaned across her mahogany desk and whispered the option that would change everything, the option that required absolute precision: vehicle deterrence. "If you do this, Art," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "you have to be transparent. You cannot set a booby trap. You cannot hide it in the leaves like a Viet Cong snare. You have to warn her so clearly that her ignorance becomes her admission of guilt." I ordered the equipment that afternoon from a licensed security vendor, high-grade, spring-loaded spikes designed to deflate, not explode, ensuring the vehicle would grind to a halt without flipping over. I wasn't trying to hurt Brenda. I just wanted to hurt her SUV, the symbol of her power. My checklist was a thing of beauty: notify the sheriff, purchase industrial signage, install redundant camera systems, and document every single step. I emailed Deputy Morgan with the invoices, the serial numbers, and a map of exactly where the strips would be buried, telling her, "I am deploying these next week. Come inspect them. I want no surprises." Deputy Morgan came out on a Friday, walking the line with me, squinting at the new signs I'd planted every 50 feet. Huge, reflective yellow monstrosities that screamed private road, tire damage ahead, deterrent devices in use. She checked the installation, verified the safety mechanisms, and looked at me with a grim nod, handing me a patrol record that acknowledged my notification, saying, "If she drives over these after seeing those signs, that's on her. Art, just call us when it happens." When, not if. I spent the weekend obsessing, checking the camera angles, wiping dust off the lenses, making sure the backup hard drives were spinning. Old Man Russo came by, saw the setup, and whistled low, saying, "You're building a fortress, son," and I told him, "No, I'm building a consequence." Monday morning arrived with a silence so heavy you could choke on it. I was up at 4 a.m., coffee black as oil, sitting in front of my laptop watching the live feeds, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a war drum. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the corn in gold, a deceptive peace before the violence of the lesson. 6:45 a.m., Old Man Russo drove by on the main road, waving. 7 a.m., the birds started singing. 7:13 a.m., the devil arrived. I saw the glint of sunlight on chrome before I heard the engine, that familiar white SUV cresting the hill, moving with the confident speed of someone who owns the world. She passed the first sign, private road. She didn't tap the brakes. She passed the second sign, tire damage ahead. She didn't even waver. She passed the third sign, a massive billboard of a warning, and I held my breath, my finger hovering over the save clip button. She hit the first strip at 35 miles per hour. Thwumpus. It wasn't a bang. It was a sickening, satisfying exhale, the sound of technology defeating arrogance. The front tires went instantly, the SUV dipping violently forward like a beast shot in the legs, the plastic bumper scraping the dirt. A normal person would have stopped, but Brenda Sterling pushed the gas, dragging the rims, sparks flying in the morning light, until, thwump-hiss, the rear tires met the second row. The SUV shuddered, fishtailed slightly in the dust, and groaned to a halt in the middle of my road, a beached wail of luxury metal. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I felt a cold, clinical relief wash over me as I watched her door fly open. Brenda stumbled out, stiff-legged, looking at the shredded rubber ribbons that used to be her tires, and then she kicked the wheel, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. I dialed the sheriff. Deputy Morgan, it's Art Miller. It's done. Trespasser disabled. Send a unit. By the time I walked out to the road, phone held high to record, she was screaming into her cell phone, yelling at her husband Charles, blaming him, blaming the car, blaming the dirt. When she saw me, she froze, her eyes widening with a manic light. You, she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. You tried to kill me. You put bombs in the road. This is attempted murder. I'm suing you for everything you own. I stood 10 feet away, boots planted in the soil I was defending, and spoke calmly for the camera. Brenda Sterling, you are trespassing on private property marked with warning signs you chose to ignore. You have destroyed my land, harassed my livestock, and now you have disabled your own vehicle. These signs are fake, she yelled, gesturing at the bright yellow metal shining in the sun. This is an easement. My husband is the HOA president. You have no idea who you're messing with. I know exactly who I'm messing with, I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. Someone who thinks the rules stop where her feelings begin. She pulled out her phone to record me, spinning the narrative instantly, crying crocodile tears, narrating to her invisible audience that she was being held hostage by a violent farmer, but her performance was cut short by the wail of a siren. Deputy Morgan stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting her hat, her face impassive. Brenda rushed her, babbling about traps and maniacs, but Deputy Morgan just held up a hand and walked over to me. Everything recorded, Mr. Miller? 3 angles, backed up, plus the logs, I said, handing her the evidence folder. Deputy Morgan turned to Brenda. Ma'am, did you see the signs? They're illegal. He can't put those there. Actually, Deputy Morgan said, checking the serial numbers on the invoice I provided, he can. And since you ignored them, you are currently criminally trespassing. I'm issuing you a citation, and you need to get this vehicle off his land immediately. The color drained from Brenda's face, leaving her looking like a ghost in a pantsuit. You can't be serious. I'm the victim. No, ma'am, Deputy Morgan said, writing the ticket. You're the suspect. And then, the tow truck arrived, the final insult to her injury. A massive diesel beast driven by a guy named Walt who looked at the Escalade with 4 flat tires and whistled. All 4. Lady, you really wanted to get somewhere fast. When Brenda tried to pay with her black credit card, it declined. The look on her face, pure, baffled shock, was worth every penny I'd spent on those spikes. She had to use a backup card, signing the receipt with a trembling hand while I stood there, silent, watching the white SUV get dragged away like a carcass, leaving my road scarred but finally, blissfully empty. The silence that followed the tow truck was heavy, not empty, but full of anticipation, like the air before a thunderstorm. I knew Brenda Sterling wasn't the type to lick her wounds and learn a lesson. She was the type to double down, to weaponize her humiliation and fire it back in the form of a lawsuit. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It wasn't a standard envelope. It was a thick packet from a downtown firm, heavy on the linen paper and even heavier on the threats. It demanded $42,000 for vehicle destruction, emotional trauma, and reckless endangerment, painting me as a lunatic who laid siege to an innocent mother on her morning commute. I read it over coffee, laughing a dry, humorless laugh, and called Sarah. "This is perfect," Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "They just overplayed their hand. By suing you, they've opened the door for discovery, and we are going to walk right through it with a battering ram." We filed a counterclaim that was a masterpiece of legal violence. We didn't just ask for the cost of the gate she broke or the corn she flattened. We sued for the veterinary bills for Bessie, the cost of the camera system, the emotional distress of 6 months of harassment, and punitive damages for willful trespass. We attached every photo, every video, every ignored letter. But the real twist, the knife in the dark that none of us saw coming, didn't come from my lawyer. It came from Oakwood Heights itself. Old Man Russo was the first to hear the rumor. He leaned over the fence a week later, grinning like a gargoyle. "Hey Art, you hear about your girlfriend Brenda? Word is, the HOA is auditing the books." "Why?" I asked. "Because that lawyer she hired to sue you, the one asking for 40 grand, she paid his retainer with the neighborhood's landscaping fund." My jaw nearly hit the dirt. Brenda hadn't just been arrogant, she had been embezzling. She felt so entitled to her lifestyle that she believed the community's money was her personal war chest. A woman named Mrs. Higgins, the quiet assistant treasurer who Brenda had probably bullied for years, had finally had enough and blown the whistle. The dominoes fell so fast it was dizzying. The local paper ran the headline: HOA officers removed amid fraud investigation. Brenda and her husband Charles were stripped of their titles. The police seized their records. The easement she claimed existed was revealed to be a complete fabrication she'd used to justify her laziness. The court date for the trespass charge finally arrived in April. The courthouse smelled of floor wax and old misery. Brenda was there, looking smaller, stripped of her gold jewelry and her bravado, sitting next to a public defender because her fancy lawyers had dumped her when the money dried up. The prosecutor didn't mince words. He played the video of her hitting the spikes. He showed the judge the signs. He read the letters she had thrown in the mud. "Your Honor," the judge said, looking over her glasses at Brenda, "I see no confusion here. I see entitlement. You believed you were above the law, and you were wrong." Brenda pleaded guilty. She got probation, a massive fine, and a restraining order that kept her 500 feet away from my farm forever. But the civil side was even sweeter. She had to pay me restitution for every stalk of corn and every vet bill, money that she didn't have anymore, forcing them to sell that big house in Oakwood Heights and move 2 towns over. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright spring sunshine, taking the first deep breath I'd had in a year. Sarah patted my shoulder and said, "Justice is slow, Art, but it grinds fine." The drive home was quiet. When I turned onto my dirt road, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. The signs were still there, gleaming sentinels, but the road was empty. No ruts, no engine noise, just the wind. I stopped the truck near the spot where the spikes had been. The grass was already growing back, wild and green, covering the scars in the earth. I thought about Brenda, about the house she lost, the reputation she destroyed, all because she couldn't stand the idea of driving an extra 8 minutes. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We live in a world that rewards the loud, the aggressive, the people who take what they want. We're told to turn the other cheek, to be polite, to keep our heads down. But sometimes, peace isn't given. It has to be taken back, inch by inch, with patience and paperwork. Was it petty to spike her tires? Maybe. Was it necessary? Absolutely. Because bullies don't stop because you ask them nicely. They stop when they hit a wall they can't climb. I sipped my coffee on the porch that night, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness, finally hearing the only sound I ever wanted to hear. Absolutely nothing. But I ask you this. Where is the line between defending your home and escalating a war? Did Brenda deserve to lose everything for a shortcut? Or was I just the rock that finally broke the scissors? You tell me. Because from where I'm sitting, looking at my quiet fields, the price of admission was worth every penny.